Alright class, now that we've practiced some FRQs, we're going to learn how they are graded. This is usually the best way to understand what you should be doing during the test, is to know what they look for when they're grading it. So if we look at the question we had last time, the population pyramids above represent two countries at different stages of the demographic transition and economic development. Explain the demographic characteristics of each country above with respect to the demographic transition model. Discuss one positive impact of each country's population structure on its economic development, and discuss one negative impact of each country's population structure on its economic development. So, to answer this question, you have to understand multiple things. You have to be able to read population pyramids. You have to understand what the demographic transition model is, and you need to understand what it means when they say economic development. So here we have our population pyramids, and I've pulled up the demographic transition model for us to see as well. These are the ones with the 4 and then possibly 5 stages. So stage 1, 2, 3, and 4. Remember, population increase as you go through because of death and birth rates changing over time. Now in stage 1, high death rate, high birth rate. Stage 2, the birth rate's still high, but the death rate starts to decline rapidly. Stage 3, the death rate's still slowly declining, but the birth rate starts to decline. And then in stage 4, they are both low, which levels off the population growth. So, when we're looking at this, a couple of things you need to make sure when you're reading this question. So think about what are the things that I need to know, which we've talked about, and what exactly is the question asking. So let's look at their grading rubric for this particular question. So part A, explain the demographic characteristics of each country above with respect to the demographic transition model. So you have two countries, so you're going to have two parts of this answer. Country A. So to get points, the student must mention stage 2, the second or early expanding stage, and elaborate briefly about its characteristics, such as high birth rate, falling death rate, youthful population, and that it's a developing country. It is not acceptable to suggest stages 1 or 3 for country A. Now remember, we don't have any more stage 1 countries. We have moved on past that. Almost all the world is in this stage 2. Country B must mention stage 4, the fourth, final, or low stationary stage. And you must elaborate briefly about its characteristics, such as low birth rate, low death rate, aging population, and that it's a developed country. It is also acceptable to mention a possible stage 5 for country B. So it's stage 4, maybe they'll accept stage 5 depending on how you word it. So looking at these stages and comparing them to this population pyramid. If we're looking at this one with large amounts of young people and very few elderly, you could say this is a high birth rate, but also a relatively high death rate. So that would put it in stages 1 or 2. Now we've talked about in class and today that there is no stage 1. So if we're looking at a country, we're going to start with stage 2. Now if it was stage 1, you would imagine that there would be almost no one in this top tier of the pyramid. If the death rate is this high in a stage 1, where it's basically hunter-gathering situation, you won't have many people at all living past the ages of 30, 40, 50 tops. Now looking at Pyramid B, you can see this kind of smooth transition. People are living longer, fewer children are being born, so this lets you know that it should be in stage 4. Now for part B, discuss one positive impact of each country's population structure on its economic development. So you're going to do one positive key word, has to be a positive, and for each country. So you should have two parts to this answer. So country A, they're looking for things like expanding a large workforce, youthful population, which means creativity, less need for immigrant labor because you have a young, healthy workforce, and less need for an elderly safety net because you don't have many people living that long. These are all positives on the economy of people dying at a young age and having a large youthful population. You have labor, you don't have to take care of the elderly. Country B, educated workforce, low youth dependency ratio. So just like here we have a elderly dependency ratio that's low, here we have a youth dependency ratio that's low. More women are compensated in the workforce. We know as more developed countries, it lowers the women's gap. And there's a tendency to spend discretionary income on needs other than education. You might need some immigrant labor because you're missing that low, healthy population. And this allows citizens to take higher jobs. So with your workforce, a more middle-aged workforce and more educated, they're taking those tertiary jobs. And then finally, part C, you have to discuss one negative aspect of each of these countries' population structure. So for example, country A, high youth dependency. There's lots of young children for people to take care of. It's a strain on resources. We know these are developing countries, so with a rapid population growth, their resources are going to be strained. And then usually this developing aspect goes hand in hand with a bigger gap or a gender gap for women. And in country B, high elderly dependency ratio, so as people become older, they have to be taken care of. A possible labor shortage in the future because you're missing that young workforce. And they're going to need to fund that elderly population, so with things like Social Security. So what we're going to do next is we're going to see some example answers taken from the AP test. So these are actual student answers and how they were graded, so you can see what score they got. So we'll start with this one. So over here you'll have your rubric for part A, and let's see how they did. The demographic transition model states that countries go through 4 stages of demographic transition, corresponding to economic development. In stage 1, both birth rate and death rate are high, and the population remains static. In stage 2 and 3, death rate drops, followed by a drop in birth rate as people get more education and women become more empowered. Finally, when the country is relatively developed, both birth and death rates are low, and population growth falls to about 0. So here they've described the demographic transition model, so you know they know what they're talking about. Now they'll go into their answer. Country A has significantly larger youth population in comparison to its older generation, showing the country is most likely in the second stage of the demographic transition. So they mentioned second stage, in which death rate is low and birth rate is high. They elaborated and explained what stage 2 is. Country B, on the other hand, is showing somewhat even age distribution, showing a relatively static population with little increase. This is an indication that the country is likely to be in the final stage of the demographic transition model, in which both birth and death rate are low. So, final stage, birth and death rate are low. So if you look here, they mentioned the stages, and they elaborated. They mentioned the stages, and they elaborated. Country A's population structure may be beneficial to the country's economic development, as there is an extremely small percentage of older generation, and the youth constitute a larger percentage of the population. As the country is probably beginning its industrialization process, a large youth population means that numbers of people entering the workforce, mainly in manufacturing industries. This provides enormous economic opportunities for the country, as large numbers of labor is possible source of competitive advantage. So they mentioned one positive. They focused on the youth population and the expanding workforce. So they used the youth as an expanding workforce. That's their one economic benefit. Remember, you have to talk about things that affected the country's economics. So workforce, manufacturing, finance, money, GDP, these are all the things you're looking for. A possible advantage of the population structure of country B is that with 0 or negative population growth, the country, which is already developed, is going to benefit from population stability, as most of the workforce of the country is expected to be in the tertiary sector with a high per capita income. A stable, decreasing population ensures there are plenty of job opportunities for college graduates, and the society has abundant resources for its citizens, example, health services. So they hit on things like education, lower need for security nets for the elderly, and this workers transitioning to a different tertiary stage. Now, if you noticed with this rubric, what these graders are looking for, they're looking for things that are there. So don't sell yourself short when writing an answer. Now, you don't want to write multiple contradictory information to see what sticks and what might be right, but you do want to expand enough so that they know that you're not just throwing out a guess, that you understand the concept you're talking about. Finally, we'll talk about the negative aspects. A negative impact of Country A's population structure is that the population is growing too fast. With rapid population growth, the country will be unable to allocate its resources such to satisfy the needs of all citizens. As a result, though the country may experience high rates of economic growth, GDP per capita may remain low, and a wider income gap is expected. Furthermore, the indication that the country will be heavily developed its secondary sector may create serious problems that hinders future growth. So they touched on, so high rates of growth, but GDP per capita is low. Lack of resources, so strain on resources. So they hit one of the topics that the grader was looking for. A negative impact of Country B's population structure is the high dependency ratio. So high population of elderly and children is a burden of the workforce, so that the country may impose high income taxes, which lowers real disposable income and inhibits the influx of foreign talents. So with their one they hit on was a greater need for Social Security. So here is the scoring that their scorer gave. So they got a 6 out of a possible 6 points. This essay demonstrates a fundamental understanding of the demographic transition and population structures, as well as the ties for each to economic development, and was awarded full credit. In Part A, the essay received 1 point for correctly identifying Country A as being in the second stage of the demographic transition by stating that the death rate is low and the birth rate is high. An additional point was earned for indicating that Country B is in the final stage of the demographic transition and noting that both birth rate and death rate are low. The response merited 2 points in Part B for discussing the positive impact of an expanding labor pool by indicating that a large youthful population translates into a sizable workforce for Country A, and for discussing the positive impact of sufficient job opportunities for college graduates and resources. In Country B, the essay was granted 2 points in Part C for correctly discussing the negative impacts on the environment created by extensive secondary sector development in Country A, and by alluding to a possible future labor shortage because of decreased inflow of foreign talents necessary to expand the new tertiary sector in Country B. So if you notice, they're pulling out quotes of things that these students added into their essay that they were looking for to justify the grade they give. Now, this is actually a very long and well-written answer, so I want you to take a moment and think about what you wrote and compare it to this. Now, that's not to say that length is all that matters in these essays. So here we have another similar essay, but we're going to skip ahead, and I'm going to post this for you to read through yourselves, but we're going to look at what this essay was lacking that it lost points. So we have a score of 4, this one, and then we have a final essay, which is the longest of the 3, which received a score of 3. So let's look at this lower scoring one first. The essay received no credit in Part A. So let's see what they did wrong in Part A. So in Country A, there is a very large population of young people ages 0 to 14. As seen in the model, not many members of the population live into late adulthood. The life expectancy in country A is relatively low. Families have high numbers of children, suggesting a high fertility rate. This country is likely shifting from an agriculture economy to a manufacturing economy. In country B, the population is rather evenly dispersed. The life expectancy is much higher, as evidenced by the large percentage of population being alive in late adulthood. And the fertility rate is fairly low and stable, which is suggested by a smaller population in the 0 to 14 range. This country is likely well developed and in a service-based economy. So this answer very well describes this population pyramid. You can tell that this particular student understands these population pyramids, can describe them, and likely even knows what stage these two are in. However, the thing that the student didn't do is in their answer actually state what stage they are in. That's why they received no points. They described what a stage 2 country looks like, but they never said the phrase stage 2. They described what a stage 4 country looks like, but they never said fourth or final stage. They received partial credit, full credit in Part B, and partial credit in Part C. So the response was given no credit in Part A because no connections are made between the population pyramids and the demographic transition for either country. The essay earned 2 points in Part B for discussing positive impacts of the workforce. Let's skip to Part C so we can see where they missed points again. In Part C, no credit was granted for country A because the essay does not discuss negative impacts such as a high youth dependency, ratios, gender issues, or strain on resources. So, country A, although it is large, easily accessible workforce, will not easily expand with its current condition. The uneducated labor will have little knowledge or motive to revolutionize the industry and economic development. Will be slow moving at best. Since people aren't living long enough as an aggregate, the idea of an expanded labor force is disrupted. So, this is what they were looking for as a negative. Higher elderly dependency ratio, possible future labor shortage, and a greater need for Social Security. So, they were granted no credit because they didn't discuss the negative impacts they were looking for. So this is why you want to make sure that you're elaborating on several things, but make sure they're not contradictory, to give yourself the best chance of finding what they are looking for when they're grading. Now, this will be posted for you to read through, and I will also post a copy of the essays you wrote without names, and we're going to take our turns and grade them to see how we think we did as our own class. Now again, if you have any questions, you can post them in the Google Classroom. I'll post the Google form along with this, as with the rubric and these examples for us to read through. Again, stay safe, and we'll pick this up in next class, and we'll talk about what we thought we got on our essays.